My name is Jade with Cloud Range. We're all really excited to be here and to see everyone who's joining us today. We've got a great team and we are excited about what we have going on here today at Cloud Range. Today's speakers are Tom Marsland, VP of Technology at Cloud Range, Marcus Linder, Senior Attack Master at Cloud Range. Before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. The webinar will be 30 minutes long and a recorded version of this webinar will be available. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, and our speakers will answer questions as they come in or at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, let me hand this off to Tom and Marcus.
Jade, thank you so much for the introduction. Marcus, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing fantastic. Welcome to everybody that's here for the webinar. As Jade mentioned, I'm Tom Marsland, VP of Technology and Technical Services here at Cloud Range, which means the teams that I work with handle everything from the training content, the infrastructure that our cyber rangers are built on, as well as our elite attack masters, of which Marcus here is heading up that group as well. Today we're going to talk about tabletop exercises. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how we can make tabletops for your organizations more actionable and simpler to plan. We'll even touch a little bit on how to integrate AI, artificial intelligence, safely into your exercise design if you're building your own. We'll discuss about how you can really get a return on investment and measure the impact and value of those efforts, and how you can align those to cover compliance requirements that your organization might be falling under. With that, first, I'd love to just go through a quick poll for the audience. You should see this pop up on your screen. But the question is, when you consider design, planning, and execution, how much of a burden to you are tabletop exercises? 1 to 5. 1 being it's super easy, 5 being it's a slog every time. And we'll just let that go for just a minute. Alrighty, so out of the responses, we've got most people skewed towards the higher end, 4s and 5s. 50% are saying 4, 20% are saying a 5, and then a couple of votes at the 3 and 1 vote for a 2. But nobody said it's easy, practically a single click. And so hopefully we can help drive those numbers in the direction of 1. Probably not going to get to 1 click today. A little bit about Cloud Range itself. Cloud Range was founded in 2018. Our founder, Debbie Gordon, we're headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee, and we deliver the industry's first completely remotely delivered cybersecurity simulation training platform. We offer this in a couple of methods. One, through Marcus and his attack masters as our facilitated solution, where teams are coming in on a routine cadence and experiencing live fire cyber attacks in our cyber range. Our cyber range being an emulation of a corporate Active Directory enterprise network with all the bells and whistles and tools that you would expect in your production environment. The other way that we offer that is as the platform as a service. We have customers utilizing the range for things like demos, sandboxing, malware, reverse engineering, forensics, and also training their own teams, their own SOC analysts, especially on the 24/7 kind of follow the sun kind of SOC models that some of our customers are using. This really has established a new category in cybersecurity. Cyber ranges previously were much smaller, less realistic, and we would liken those to labs today. And at Cloud Range, we're dealing with customers and partners on every continent. But today, we're here to talk a little bit more about tabletop exercises and how those fit with cybersecurity training and the compliance requirements that our customers and our organizations are under. Some of our customers shown here on this slide, again, just to show that we are working globally with a wide variety of customers, from enterprise security teams to managed security providers, colleges and universities, military and government, and on the workforce development side, even a little bit on the industrial control and utility provider networks as well. So without further ado, let's get into the tabletop discussion. Marcus, when you think of a tabletop, and really what makes them successful? What are some of the things that come to your mind?
I would say one of the key goals to making a tabletop successful is really the stressing of the team that's going through them, making sure that they are encouraged to fail, put in situations that they may not have been in before, and really honing in on where those gaps are in their understanding to ensure that those things can be corrected before something in the real world happens that you can't easily correct from, rather than saying, oh, we're making a policy change. Instead, half the systems are down.
Yeah, great point. That some of the things that I take away from that, you have to have action items coming out of that exercise. You got to have things that your team's going to be able to follow up on and drive meaningful change in your organization. As the slide discusses, really focused on identifying gaps and improvements, should be collaborative, working across teams. They don't always have to be that way, and we'll dive into that a little bit when we discuss how we can make tabletops routine. But they also should be preparation for real world events based on scenarios that can actually impact that specific customer. You as an owner of that network, what is impacting and what are the threats to your environment? It doesn't do any good to run a tabletop scenario that's something that would never impact you. Running something around availability of industrial controls when you don't have that in your environment isn't going to be a useful exercise for you.
Agreed.
What are some of the fails you've seen in tabletops, Marcus? What are tabletops not made to do?
So very much not the check in the box. That's honestly the biggest point I've seen. It's also not to critique how you granularly look into an incident response plan. It's definitely not something where you look at, okay, well, we need to look at this machine, then this machine, then this machine. Those plans need to be in place, but it's more about the overarching architecture of the strategy of incident response, not necessarily the techniques of incident response. It's not, oh, we've done a tabletop, so we're good to go. It doesn't mean that everything is fine. It doesn't mean you don't have gaps. It doesn't mean that you don't have some places that you can improve on, dig into, and then it doesn't tell you everything about your environment. There may be some machine that is unpatched living off your network in some somehow trusted domain you have sitting in some other country. It doesn't tell you everything that you need to know. I would say it's closer to a mental exercise of what could happen and how you respond to that, and gaining the muscle memory internally rather than something that you can use as a quantifiable. We know everything about our environment. We know how we can get hit. We won't get hit that way, and so we're done.
Yeah, great points. I liken this back a little bit to my time with the military before coming to Cloud Range. We would run drill casualty exercises on the ships I served on. And the first thing that we did before we would actually test the entire crew is we would get the leadership together and we would say, what is our strategy for combating, flooding, for instance? What is the big picture going to happen? And here are all the policies that we've provided the rest of our crew, our shipmates, to deal with that casualty. Are those adequate enough for them? And so we would sit down, and it was really kind of a brainstorming whiteboarding session where we would walk through those and make sure that what we were going to put out as leadership made sense. When we think about tabletop exercises, the thing that probably drives me crazy the most is wasted time. And if you're treating them just as a check in the box activity for compliance, great, you're meeting that metric. But are you taking anything out of it that's going to make your organization better? Are you actually identifying gaps in your processes? And if you are you closing that loop and actually changing those things? You hit on some great points. This doesn't take the place of a penetration test against your environment. It is not an assessment. It also isn't going to provide you guaranteed protection. Just because we did a tabletop, you could still be hit with ransomware tomorrow. You could still have an insider threat. And it's not going to be just a replacement for incident response plans. This is where you can identify the gaps in those plans and fix them and make sure that they're adequately sized for your organization.
I would also, Tom, on the same vein where you were mentioning the military casualty incidents that you would run through. I think
Yeah.
also a huge benefit with those that I saw in my time was the unplanned ones. They were planned but not notified to the crew. So then you just take one sailor and say, "Oh, well, you are a man overboard today," and have the entire ship run through that process and understand what they needed to do in that real incident rather than necessarily just going through the motions or, oh, this is a drill so we don't have to worry about it, and actually taking that seriously, which I think is a level you need to bring to the tabletops of this is real and treat it as such, so then you can actually get those correct actionable items out of it.
Yeah, great points. When you think about tabletops, you also have to think about what outcome are you trying to achieve. When organizations are focusing on the check in the box requirements, they're probably doing them all the same flavor. They come with a printed out scenario with 5 or 10 questions to ask about it, and they get the executive team in the boardroom and they read the scenario and ask the questions. And at the end of the day, everyone pats themselves on the back and walks away saying, we saved the world. Think about the outcome you're going to, and our slide here talks a little bit about it. Just Marcus, as you just said, blindly, picking somebody and saying, "Hey, we're going with this. This is the scenario. Go," and testing the entire process. That's one great way to do it, where you're testing the overall organization response. And at Cloud Range, we've done tabletop exercises where we use the cyber range and start with an attack with the technical team there. And then when the technical team escalates that incident to the level of the executive team, then it transitions to more of your typical kind of tabletop. But it doesn't have to be that holistic, big organization event. A tabletop exercise can just live to test just the SOC team. And the SOC team lead can grab that scenario and say, "Hey, do our policies and procedures work for this? Are we going to identify any gaps?" The communications team at a big organization can grab that same scenario and say, "Hey, if we had an escalation of a ransomware incident, how would we respond publicly?" And they can have a brainstorming session around that. That counts as a tabletop. Obviously, testing executive decision making, and finally, regulatory compliance. There are regulations around protection of consumer data that we are all beholden to, and making sure that the actions taken, going back and closing the loop and make sure those align with those compliance requirements, are also key. What are your thoughts here?
I think the external communications is a great point. I think it goes back actually to your cross functionality that you mentioned in a previous slide, because yes, the legal team may have a press release ready. They may be, okay, we're going to say, yes, we got hit with a ransomware attack, but we've mitigated it as much as possible. Customer data is totally safe. And that is what they've practiced. But when you engage now the executive team and maybe the CEO wants to say, nope, we want to take full responsibility for it. We want to tell our customers it was our fault. We'll reimburse them. It's a very different feel of that press release. And without that tested communication, you may not know how they want to actually push out that information, or how much authority do you have over what gets released. And having those communication methods in place to understand what the company and as a whole is trying to accomplish, or the organization as a whole is trying to accomplish, it's very beneficial. As well as, to your point, Tom, that internal communication as well of how does the technical team communicate to the executive team, to the legal team, and how the organization as a whole communicates across it. Because especially with those smaller pieces and testing the technical team, testing the legal team in their own individual tabletops, you do need to actually ensure that if you get to, say, an executive tabletop, you have those key decision makers and communication pieces from those smaller departments communicating up, so that actually gets stressed and tested as well.
Yeah, great point. I think that the point we're trying to make across this slide and the previous one that we're discussing is really, at some point you want to test your organization's holistic response from the initiating of that alert in the SIM all the way through to, the ransomware has happened or the insider threat has happened and there's been a data breach and you're communicating to the public. But that's just one style of a tabletop you can run. You can run them at the lowest level, at the department heads testing their individual pieces. And when you have those individual building blocks all working the way they should, that's when you can really bring those pieces together and make a bigger event that's going to test the full gamut, the pipeline of alert to completion of the incident. So one thing you mentioned the external communications. One thing that came to my mind there was a ransomware attack that hit an agency down in the state of Florida. There was a sheriff's department at a county. They gave a presentation on we were at last year, where they got to the point of external communication, and the systems that they would have used to release those comms were also part of the attack. And they didn't think about, well, how am I going to do this if I don't have a computer? Because they had no technology available to them really at that point. And so when you break this down into, hey, at the communications department, we're going to run this scenario and talk through it, you can really have those minds thinking of those things like, well, what if we couldn't communicate out? How would we handle that? When you get into the testing of the technical team, that's going to be more granular than that big picture executive response. And so the technical leadership can be thinking like, well, what if our SIM isn't working? What if our backups are all gone? And they can really get into those technical pieces. And the same thing, if you have a GRC arm of your organization, they can really dive into those requirements for compliance and make sure that things like your press releases and all that are going to align with those things. Yeah, great points.
Well, and I honestly, you mentioned the idea of looking in of what could happen and analyzing your own systems. I think that also comes true on the takeaways from a tabletop as well, is being honest with yourself. What did I mess up? What could I have done better? Where could I improve this process? What process do we need? And looking at yourself internally as well as your department or organization internally, and being honest about those shortcomings to be able to actually improve them.
Absolutely, great point. We stress it in the range training that we do frequently. It's a safe place to conduct simulated training, right? You're not affecting any production systems, and you can mess up. Tabletop exercises are the same thing. We need to treat them like they're real, so that everyone is being serious about them and really thinking through, what would I do in this moment? But at the end of the day, the goal is that the team has actionable takeaways, that they're looking internally at their own processes, at what they might do differently, and they're just taking away steps to continuously improve. That's the whole goal of the exercise. It doesn't need to be anything elaborate or beyond that. As long as you're not wasting the team's time, you're testing your actual policies and procedures, and you're coming out with action items, and you're actually following up and closing those. That's all that you could hope for out of something like this. Great points. So we talked about making these routine, and I think we hit on that a bit with, you can take those down to the department level. You can take those down to the team level. Here at Cloud Range, we're working on developing a platform to enable you to do that, and we'll have a separate webinar where we go through that product launch when that time comes. But we're working on that right now, and some things that we want to share are information that you should collect when planning one. Now, the reasons behind each of these is kind of what I want to focus on for this little phase of our discussion. But really, it boils down to knowing what the threats or risks to your company are, is kind of the reason that you want to collect these things. Do you have offices in multiple locations? If so, how is the team communicating? Is there VPN set up? Are there remote sites? Where are your backups stored? How many people? What does your company do? Reasons behind that is because there's going to be different regulations based on those locations that people are at, what data is being stored, what your technology stack is, and really what the core of your business is. We work with a wide variety of customers. Some of those are more likely to be dealing with things like supply chain compromises or supply chain attacks, where they're shipping hardware out or software out to their customer bases. Some of those are dealing with healthcare data, and so we have to look at HIPAA and those kinds of things. Marcus, your thoughts?
I think you hit the nail right on the head, Tom. It's about identifying those gaps, right? And having a comprehensive list of information like this allows you to identify those gaps and maybe focus a tabletop on those areas that, whether there's an actual gap there or even just a perceived gap of how would we handle this? What would we do here? The answers may already be documented somewhere, but who's responsible for going and finding that documentation or that plan and running through those locations? So I think you absolutely nailed it. It's about finding those threat vectors someone could leverage during a real incident.
Awesome. Yeah, a little bit behind the scenes. This is just some early screenshots of some of our scheduling in our tabletop platform, but there's no reason why at an organization level you can't be scheduling those out quarterly, biannually. There's no reason why you can't be running through different scenarios that could affect your organization. I would say almost every organization, it has some vulnerabilities to phishing at a user base. A lot of the companies that I'm working with now are doing phishing testing where they're actually sending emails to their employees and seeing who gets hit with that. But tabletopping your policies and procedures around how you would detect and mitigate those things is important. Looking at software vulnerabilities, if you are that kind of company in that industry, and of course, the theme of the last few years has been very heavily on ransomware and the release of that data. And so really what we're focusing on doing is trying to enable all of our customers to be able to deliver tabletops routinely. And that's what we're working to show here. Now let's open a can of worms a little bit and discuss artificial intelligence. And I'm going to let you start this one, Marcus.
So the basis for the whole thing is to keep it generic. If you have an internal LLM AI tool, using that with maybe some specifics from your organizations, that could potentially be okay as long as that data isn't getting shipped external to your organization. But if you're using any open source or publicly available tools, keep it highly generic. However, you can do a couple things with these tools to help the more administrative, monotonous work about it. So, for instance, generating facilitator questions. You have the scenario. It could potentially, some AI tool could give you, say, 10 questions to actually ask to help facilitate. You are going to have to go through there and give it the human component, make sure that these are correctly worded questions, they actually apply to the scenario you want to run, but it can give you a solid jumping off point and basis to begin those questions. So keeping it generic and then getting those questions and then building those off of those, that can be useful. Same thing for artifacts for the team of give me 10 artifacts from a ransomware scenario. Then you could actually run give those artifacts and have those be articulatable to the team, even if you aren't entirely technical enough to identify what those artifacts would be, and see if your team would know what those artifacts even mean as well. Maybe get someone to look at it to ensure that those are accurate. Analyzing actions against industry frameworks. That's a big one because those frameworks have very strict policies and guidelines and compliance initiatives. You can say, these were the actions taken. How did I meet SOC 2, for instance? And it can actually cross-analyze what those metrics are and give you very definitive, this is something you should do, this is something you shouldn't do, and understand that framework much more succinctly based on your actions. Generate recommendations and tasks based on actions taken. That, again, this can be general. How do I help mitigate confrontation between two executives, for instance? May help you come up with some strategies or things like that of, okay, these two members of the executive team really seem to butt heads and have very different strategies. How can we bring that together and give you some idea of where to approach those potential problems as well?
Yeah, great points. The biggest thing that I'm going to hit on here is responsible use of AI always includes the human component reviewing the output, right? And if the LLM isn't something under your control, or you're not under an enterprise contract where you can guarantee that data is not being used to train, then keep it generic, right? Facilitator questions and artifacts, you don't have to specify your organization and what your specific threats are to ask for those kinds of things out of an LLM. The last two, analyzing actions and generated recommendations, again, keep it very generic, like Marcus just said there. This is an example of our platform and how we can analyze actions against a variety of frameworks. We are coming up on the 30, so I'm gonna move this along quickly, but basically the actions that we document as we facilitate tabletops or as our customers use our platform to facilitate tabletops will allow them to analyze those actions that are documented in the response of the tabletop against a variety of frameworks. In this case, I'm just showing some of HIPAA. So, step one here, the team noted the potential impact of those medical records being leaked. That directly aligns with HIPAA security rules, administrative safeguards, and EPHI, for example. Last thing, and then we'll open to Q&A. None of this matters if there's no follow-up and action items taken. So documenting what occurred during the exercise, what everyone did, is great. That gets you kind of a transcript of what happened. But at some point, you have to take those into action items that you can work on with your team. Nobody wants to have the entire board of directors and the C-suite sitting for 2 hours in a boardroom, and then a year later we do the same thing again and we find out the same problems still exist. That's only an extremely expensive waste of time. So some things here to think about. Every action item should have a person responsible and a target date. There should be a follow-up by whoever the tabletop manager or facilitator was. And you want to document what didn't go well, but you do want to document the successes as well. Just getting through, especially a cross-functional coordinated exercise, is an accomplishment in of itself, and it's something that should be celebrated on the team. Marcus, any comments there?
No, I think you summed it up quite well, Tom.
Awesome. Some recommendations, same thing. With our platform, we're capturing those things and making it able to be assigned out as well. And with that, I would love to open the floor just to any questions that anybody here attending has today. All right, well, with that, I'll just leave you with a couple things. So first, if you're interested in following our efforts to really make tabletops routine and make it so something that your organizations can be enabled to run internally, or bring us in to facilitate for that third-party external point of view, please continue to follow us. And if you're interested in looking at a demo of our CyberRange platform, which is the platform we would use when we're bringing the technical teams into these exercises as well, then please reach out to request a demo. Our contact information is here on the slide. And other than that, thank you so much for attending today. Again, tabletops aren't a check in the box activity. They are something to make your organization better. If you approach them with that mindset, then you're bound to be successful. Thanks, everyone, and I hope you have a great day.